domestic workers. There are state rights for domestic workers that have now been passed in New York State. There's a pending bill in California. There are no federal protections for domestic workers who work individually in the home, which is what you're talking about. Because both they don't meet the minimum standard of number of employees for a firm when you're working in households. So domestic workers are covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, for minimum wages and have been since 1978. In fact, the founding of ULU came out of a campaign to get enforcement for the minimum wage here in New Orleans and other cities for when they first got coverage under FLSA. But that domestic workers are an emerging group, just like home health care and other workers. Unions have not been that engaged and been supportive of the lobbying process. And there's, at this point, still lacks the sustainability model. Even in New York, the Domestic Workers Union has less than 3,000 members. It's something like 1,500. So it's a project.
So that when you refer to the healthcare workers,
right?
They completely classify the different category of workers from
domestic.
Well, we had to establish that. Now it all seems settled, but in the mid-1980s, we won a number of cases in Illinois, Massachusetts, and elsewhere to determine that there was an employee-employer relationship. And there were two issues that employers raised. One was whether or not they had a supervisor other than the client in the home. Was the client the boss? Well, there's no way the client was the boss, but in some cases, they had an argument case. And the other was whether or not, because so much of the program was government reimbursed, whether or not there was what's called an arm's length bargaining relationship, because you were essentially bargaining with, Ken was the employer, I was bargaining with Ken for whether or not the state and federal government might reimburse more for us to provide higher wages.
I'm confused. Both categories.
Right. But they, in some ways, your question is exactly right, because when we first organized them, they were seen much more as housekeepers age, chore workers was one of the categories. They were seen much more as domestic kind of workers than as healthcare workers. In some ways, it's pushing them over more towards the healthcare side that helped us establish some of the entitlements and rights that have now been won largely state by state. They are covered. The private sector home health care workers are the least organized.
And that's where the whole country is pushing, is going towards private one-on-one home health care. And Louisiana, I think, is ahead of the curve in terms of the fact that you can see, and we've been hearing this from a lot of the companies that we have contracts with, they will tell us, the state really wants to only have contracts with companies that do one-on-one healthcare because they think it's cheaper than having community homes. So we went from having mental institutions, huge buildings that house, developmentally disabled clients. And what's the name of that law that they passed?
Very deputies.
Yeah. And so there's...
On the mental health, mental retardation side, Louisiana had one of the lead cases called Gary W. G-A-R-Y, the word W, because they were masking the last name, where it was a client with those issues that was being warehoused in Texas rather than Louisiana. So the family sued saying Louisiana has an obligation to provide that kind of support in Louisiana. So it forced the repatriation of mentally retarded mental health patients from Texas and elsewhere back to Louisiana, and that sort of created the home health care, the community mental health homes.
So from there, so it's two-sided. That was a client advocacy issue, but because of that case, they moved from warehousing clients to having these community home health homes in the community, which would house, anywhere from 2 to 10 people So it's still a group home type facility, and now what we're seeing all these years later is that the state and client advocacy groups are pushing clients into individual living situations where they would live by themselves in an apartment, and the home health care worker would service them in their home. And that is gonna change how we organize this type of worker, because we're seeing this happen more and more often, and isolating the workers in this way makes it a lot harder to find them, honestly. So
initially in the 80s, we were able to, in the early 90s, able to organize some of these companies because home health workers specifically, they were being contracted in private sector companies in some states like Illinois. They had check days where the only time they would come in is for training or to pick up their check. You'd find them at the check days. Well, that was so successful for us, they don't do that much. So now it's what Danae's talking about. And these workers sort of are on the bubble between being stable, permanent employees and casual, temporary employees. They'll have multiple clients they're taking care of, transportation issues. To get 40 hours of work, they may be on the bus 20 hours, going back and forth to a half dozen clients. There's specific reimbursement periods. So their employment is a real challenge. Now, under the NRA, as you've raised this, these garbage laborers that we represent are under a separate category of temporary workers. So there was you could organize under the NRA temporary workers if you proved that over a 3-month period, they averaged at least 16 hours a week during that period. So if you could establish that, you could file for an election in the NLRB and win that election. That's how we originally won these elections here in Texas and in Louisiana with our local. Same thing was applied with home health care originally, and then they tried to argue the legal issue, and I hate to get so into weeds, was whether or not you're a co-employer. This is a classic issue for casual employees. Who's really the employer? The company who writes the check, the house where they're working, the state or federal government that's reimbursing. So all the companies for years, and we had to get this through the NLRB, and we won the decision in NLRB in Washington under court appeal to establish that yes, there was an employer-employee relationship. If we hadn't won that, the private sector side wouldn't have been organized. And still, there's so many private sector companies, most of them are not organized. Most of the publicly reimbursed companies through state agencies, DOORS, the Department of Rehabilitative Services in Illinois or California, those are the ones where the percentage of organization is now probably 75%, 70%, huge. California in particular.
A quick question for Rosa about the house overline. I think housing visit organizing ways, it means probably most of your members like independent workers or independent contractor or temp staff workers, they changing often their working places. It means I think usual unions mostly are basically related to the working places, but you are related to the house itself. So which means your members mostly temp staff workers or independent contractors, right?
No, they're not independent workers.
Why?
He means independent in the sense that many of them don't have a fixed workplace.
Yeah.
They're not, he doesn't mean independent contractors.
Well, I guess,
I think that her answer is going to be is some of them are and some of them aren't.
right,
I see.
Yeah, because
yeah.
we organize, as opposed to Japan, we organize on you don't organize company-wide. So a particular company like ResCare, which is one of the ones, is a national company, does a lot of subcontracting with the government, but here on the community home side, they probably now have 30 or 40 community homes. Well, they have another 20 or so we don't represent because they're outside of our area. So the fight is always, you know, is something what's called, what's the term of art here? You have to prove that there's a community interest in that bargaining unit. So there's often a fight in organizing whether or not the community of interest is so large, maybe statewide, where you are only filing for everybody in the area of Greater New Orleans. So in the organizing process, you can end up with pieces without the whole puzzle, which weakens you until you can get enough strength. I mean, so ResCare, where we have a lot of strength, partially we now represent them in Lafayette, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, but we don't represent them on the North Shore or Shreveport. So, you know, you're pushing rocks up a hill and watching them roll down, pushing rocks up a hill. So in Japan, where you have, in some cases, you know, union corporate councils that are looking at whole, not industry-wide, but corporation-wide agreements, you know, apples and oranges are all together. Somebody may be in electronics here, maybe in, you know, small manufacturing over there, maybe in services over here, and still that same union entity we're trying to represent them. We don't have that.
So I have a related question. How many organizers are doing a home visit, local 101?
How many?
Local 100, how many organizers do you
Including
have?
volunteers.
How many organizers and how many home visits?
How many organizers
We have
doing
two.
home visit?
We have 2 organizers.
In New Orleans.
Everybody, hey, we just make it
In
clear.
New Orleans.
Right. And most or all organizers are doing home visits regardless because it's a way to also recruit as well. So most organizers, all organizers gonna do home visits as well as site.
And they also do workplace visits where they have contracts.
Site visit, work visit.
Two
Where they work.
organizers.
Right.
In New Orleans.
In New Orleans, yes.
How about the television?
Those same 2 organizers are working in Baton Rouge as well.
How about the Lafayette?
Same thing.
No, sorry.
Well, those aren't far away.
Right.
Yeah,
Shreveport, there's another person in Shreveport that is far away. We have staff, organizers in Dallas, organizers in Little Rock, organizers in Houston.
So how much ratio of the organizing works in the local 100?
What do you mean,
Ratio, yeah, I mean, she mentioned about the trial, and then probably somebody has to deal with the trial matters, like the paperwork or so, but somebody doing the home visit, and then whole your job is here, and then how much ratio of you all unions works doing organizing and then
Well, I think
Right.
that,
In terms of the times.
right, I think it varies in many ways, and one of the ways is it depends on, you know, what's working for you, okay? Whether it's gonna do, whether you're gonna do the house visits or, you know, whatever works in organizing is the trail that I usually follow. And the reason I say that is because as you're doing visits, the referral system comes in where people that you're talking to, you're asking them questions about if they know their phone number, or if you know how to reach them, or what would be a good time. So I can't really say what the ratio is. It just depends on what direction this visit sends me in, so, yeah.
But mostly focus on the organizing.
Pardon me?
You are mostly focused on the organizing course. And not, as you said, you said.
It's probably more, you know, I don't know how, it's probably more 70% representing existing members and 30% doing new organizing. That's what I would bet is more the standard.
Wait a minute, I'll check the batteries. Sorry.
Okay, now we'll say what we really want to say. Because, I mean, it's sort of like, and this, you don't need to take this, but it's like when Danae was talking about Rosa spent posted last week an LRB trial. Well, you know, they aren't paying dues now, but we've represented workers in that industry for the last 15 odd years. We've, you know, got that company organized a long time ago, so you're still really servicing that members, even though it'd be like new organizing to bring them back in because they haven't been in the union, you know, for the last 2 years. This happened to us in post-Katrina too. We had to reorganize a lot of the bargaining units we had because the companies disappeared after Katrina, so we had to go, and this company was one we reorganized.
Another question about that. How many meetings do you have? Or emails?
Meeting with workers or
Staff meetings and with
What?
members, yeah, staff meetings.
With workers, we focus on trying to have one big meeting once a month in our various sites, depending on how we're, you know, set up. So it could be where we may do a couple of meetings at some points with the entire organization. So our main interest is trying to work with the folks in our meetings.
The overall problem that is at the intersection of community and labor work here in the United States is a belief that, as you know, union membership is plummeting in the United States. So for private sector workers, we're now less than 8%, which is 1 out of 12. Public sector workers are also under attack. Wisconsin, Ohio, we've heard that over and over again since you stepped into the United States, I know. That's a political attack, much like we saw in the state court. So the problem becomes, how do you create a new organizing model that works? Because clearly, at least this is our view, not everybody's view, but our view is that the existing NLRB-based, workplace-based organizing model is not producing. So you have to, this is Ken, I've referred to papers on this, and we have them on our website. So we've advocated a program of community labor unionization called majority unionism, where we first worry about building a union, and then secondarily worry about whether or not the company supports you having a union or what collective bargaining might be. We believe the first task is actually allowing workers to decide for themselves if they want a union building, which is very similar to how we've worked on the community basis with Acorn. Acorn, and we could go into how various networks of community organizations have grown here in the United States, but the Acorn model was one that focused on building community units that were membership supported. So people were actually joining, paying dues, electing officers, running meetings. It wasn't a coalition or a congress or a based on bringing organizations together once a year. It's based on like having a union in the community. It's one way in Canada, that's how they describe the Acorn Canada work. So we've taken that same kind of argument that what we saw in the community and argued that's the way we organized home healthcare workers originally, which has led to this happening. That's the way we should organize increasing numbers of professions that are not located in specific workplaces or have traditionally been very difficult to organize. And this was the case, this was why we ran the program in Walmart we talked about. It was a classic example. Walmart, as you know, is a big grocery store chain here in the United States. They've had operations in Japan. They've been, I think they don't operate in Japan now.
No. So they bought it on a store, the same style.
I'd like to be back to the question about the organizers. Who becomes an organizer? My question is, the member of the union will become, the active member will become the organizers, or you recruit some people from outside to, and you train them to be organizers.
Right, both, actually, because definitely we want our members to be organized, to be organizers as well, right? To actually be our eyes and ears and organize from inside, and yeah, we do have staff that we hire and we train to actually work toward training those members to become organized.
And to organize new units. So in a right-to-work environment, our stewards, our union stewards, and people in the workplace have to sign up new members. That's the day they're not organizing, means we don't have the members there who aren't paying the dues. I mean, there's no compulsory unionization here, no compulsory membership. You have to represent those people. Dues paying is all voluntary. So the day in some ways our members vote with their feet every day. Do they want to be in the union or do they not? So Rosa and Dine and other organizers, you need people who are professionally trained to organize new units. But we rely, the backbone of our union is our members who are signing people up every day and saying, hey, we need to organize this new unit.
Okay, so would you please give some examples of the existing organizers who were former members of the unions,
You mentioned the two organizers and local 101.
Right.
How
Local
are
100.
they working as an organizer?
How are they
How
working?
So
long?
this is Rosa and
Okay.
Dine.
Oh, just,
These are the two organizers right here.
How long, as in a day, or how long? What do you mean when you say how long? How
I think
long?
3 years, yeah, how many years
That,
are you working?
how many years have I been working?
Yeah.
For a very long time.
Sometimes she
Over
wants to
20
know
years.
the career of the leader of unions.
Okay, I think what they're trying to
Yeah,
figure
we're
out.
really confused.
They're,
on this
okay,
question.
because you guys, I've read a little bit of your paper, you're trying to figure out if we're internal or external organizing. Okay, good. I was trying to figure it out from your paper, but what they're trying to say, like, do we take members from say we take a member from LARC and make them an organizer, like paid organizer? That's what you want to know. Do we
No.
do?
And our answer is no.
Yes. Okay, that's what they're asking. So no, we don't do that.
Because
Because
we
we want.
use our members as voluntary organizers. We ask them as part of their membership, they have to help us organize. We only have 7, 8 people on the staff of the whole union. For us to grow, our members all have to see themselves as organizers. That's part of the culture of our union. Everybody organizes. Everybody organizes.
And it's a issue that will come up at different monthly meetings where, we will have represented, had a contract at a company for 20-something years and still it comes up. Well, going through what you say to respond to workers who don't want to be a part of the union because, they don't feel like they should have to pay dues because we're gonna have to represent them anyway. So, and these are leaders and members of the unions who've been with us for 20 years and still the same issues that keep on going, so we go through workers organizing, workers training all the time with our members. And, just like we would an organizer coming on staff, you have to talk to them about what your response should be when the same questions keep coming up. So, we do train our members on how to sign up new members.
So I think you have a material of training to the members.
Right, we have stewards training, we have a leadership conference every year that, brings people together, 50 or so of our best leaders throughout the union, to emphasize things. We'll look at campaigns, we'll look at membership recruitment, new organizing. We've done that now,
would you give us the materials?
Sure.
I can show you the
Yeah.
agenda.
Well, we have a stewards manual.
Yes, you'll make a note.
So the reason why I get some knowledge about the union organizing. We have little or no knowledge about the community organizing. Perhaps you use the community organized method to build up the unions.
Well, that's right. For example, in Texas, where our largest part of our membership is, collective bargaining for the workers we represent is illegal. So they can't have a contract. So winning an issue is whether or not we can organize them and mobilize them, much like a community organization does, to collectively raise an issue, to go into the boss's office and demand, a person be rehired or something, show up at a public meeting. So these are largely school workers that we represent in Texas. They are school support workers. They have no particular rights in a NRA sense or collective bargaining sense.
So, basic question, how many members does the local 100 have?
About 2,000. But now we represent, membership is counted by those people who pay dues. Because we're required to represent everybody who works in the workplace, we probably represent public and private 8,000 to 10,000 people. In Houston, for example, where we have 800 members, there are 10,000 workers in our unit alone there. No collective bargaining, no way to have an election. So you're constantly having to try to sign more people up, get more, do you represent 100% of the people in this school, nobody in that school? So
is that usual?
well, the United States is divided in half. There are roughly 26, 27 states that have a collective bargaining law for public employees, and roughly 24, 25, depends. Some of them are losing it, that have nothing. That's all what I call push and shove. So particularly in the western states and in the southern states, public employees have virtually no collective bargaining rights. Only in Florida is there an election procedure. That would say if you can petition for an election, like the NRA, get a contract or whatever. The rest, contracts are not illegal in Louisiana. So we had at one point contract for public employees here, but they're illegal by the Constitution of the state of Texas. So we got a lot of members there in the Dallas school system, Houston school system. They can't have a contract if they want.
My question is very basic understanding. I'm not sure my understanding is right or not. In Japan, so union members same meanings as employee. And then also they have collective bargaining right. But looks like new unions, even the members doesn't have any collective bargaining rights, but still they are members of your organization.
That is possible here.
Is that the usual for the usual unions? Yeah.
That's why we're arguing if you're going to rebuild the labor movement, you need to have people who can decide on their own who want to go. I mean, an employer, and I know this is heresy in Japan, but the company doesn't decide if there should be a union, it's workers who decide. That's the fundamental argument we make behind majority unionism, that we need to get back to the point of looking with only 12% of the workforce unionized in the United States, unless we look at what it takes to build a majority movement, which is people deciding they want a union, not deciding whether the employer will allow them to have a union. I did a blog today, I do one every day, about there's a huge, the Nissan auto plant in Canton, Mississippi, which is about 3 hours from here, right outside of Johnson, Mississippi. Huge plant, makes the Altima cars, which are very popular, just replaced, became the second or third most popular car in the United States. Almost 4,000 workers, about 1,000 of those temporary, about 3,000. There's no union in any foreign operated automobile plant in the United States. So Nissan, no unions, Mercedes-Benz, no unions, so all the transplants. Well, they're trying, the UAW, which is the United Automobile Workers, is trying to organize that plant. Well, the chances of them doing so successfully are very, very small. Now, our argument is, you look at those 4,000 workers, you don't ask for an election, you don't you talk about, let's join a union for all the reasons you want a union. To address working conditions, to have solidarity with each other, to do joint training, to advocate about workers' rights and better conditions. You don't need a collective bargaining agreement for any of that. And you could pay dues voluntarily, you have a union, and then you wait till you build up enough strength to petition for an election. That's not the way they do it.
Yes, the word representation, in your case, representation. What do you mean by the word representation? For example, there is one member who are not paid.
She's talking about representation, not presentation.
She asked the organizer or some union leader or you asked that question. I haven't paid. I was not paid now. So then, what do you do?
You're saying if a person that is not paying dues,
No, not.
You're talking about, like what I was saying, that we have members who are like organizers, as in they go out and sign up people, but they're not paid, and they say, I'm doing this, I should be paid, is that what you're saying?
Yes, employer didn't pay.
Oh,
Didn't
the
pay.
employer didn't pay.
So,
Oh.
so there are some grievance among
Oh.
members of the
Right.
unions. And one member asked you what to do.
okay, in each one of our contracts,
Where
there's
you have a contract.
where we have a contract. I think two things here. First of all, I think usually when something like, if there's a crisis where people just didn't get paid, period, I think there will be something, that kind of forewarn us of that. But if there's one person that just had a screw up with their check, then we would approach the employee about it, and then if there is a discrepancy that they had against what the employee had, they would go into a grievance procedure to fix that problem. First, by having the employee to deal with it themselves, to try to give us more insight on what the real problem is, and then send it in writing to the employer based on the fact that they were not paid, and give a reason as to why they should be paid. And then each step after that, it gets a little bit more into resolving the issue.
And if it was where we didn't have a contract, what would you do? Like,
I mean, I think if we didn't have a contract in Louisiana, we would be working on the site.
well,
But
No, that's where it has to do with community organizing tactics. You have to, as we do in the schools, you have to get 10 people together on agreements.
And my question is, what's the role of the union leader? Role.
what is the rule?
To assist.
Role, what is the role of the union in this situation as a representative?
well, are you specifically asking about where we have a contract or where we don't have
I
contract?
can explain for you.
Sorry.
We are looking for beyond the collective bargaining model.
Right.
So, of course, we now host the U.S. collective bargaining model, but almost collapsed with the internal savers in the United States. But if your members have no contract with company side, and then at that time, how support or help your members, even if those members don't have any collective bargaining rights or contract with the company. Worker centers, even some of the worker centers ways, they utilize the medias through the newspaper or radio or such kind of products, or to use a case trial, sue,
Right, so
company.
when Wade talks about Local 100 representing lots of workers who do not have contracts, that's mostly in Texas. So when you're asking us, we represent mostly workers who do have contracts. Although that's not true necessarily with the Hoppers, because we haven't had a contract there for years.
I don't know, I think at that point too, especially here, if there's a major issue around it and it's a public sector drive, then I think we would team up with our sister organization, Community Voice maybe, and work it through, that system on getting people together to take a stand along with the community organization and getting that particular issue resolved.
Here's an important thing you need to understand. The United States Supreme Court decided in a case called Weingarten Rights, Weingarten. It's named for what used to be a grocery store chain in Houston. That a worker had the right, if there was a union, to have representations if there was a meeting with their employer that might lead to discipline. So, if they then, an individual worker, Wade Rathke, could ask for my union representative, again, to have to represent me. If you as the employer came to me and said, I want to meet with you, Wade, about what happened yesterday out there at so-and-so's address. Now, before I agree to that meeting, I can ask for my representative to be present. You as the employer can decide, no, I'm not going to meet with you at all, and then issue the discipline, suspend me, fire me, whatever. But you cannot, based on the United States Supreme Court decision in the Weingarten right, say you will meet with me, but my representative can't come. So if I demand my union to be present, I see that. That union is present. Okay? So those are rights, just like Fair Labor Standards Act rights and whatever, that supersede whether or not there's a collective bargaining agreement or not. There's also some of those rights in transportation, health and safety, and other things. And this is part of our argument around, you don't want to get caught on the issue of collective bargaining. You want to get caught on the issue of whether or not people want a union and are willing to act as a union, have representatives, elect stewards, whatever.
I just wanted to clarify that Weingartner rights applies to any worker. So even if you don't have a union, even if you don't have collective bargaining agreements, you have the right to have a representative, which could be your union, or it could be your mom. Somebody that comes with you into that meeting, as long as it's disciplinary, right or no?
So those rights in the Weingarten decision specifically are more entitled in a situation where a union exists.
I see. In the textbook about the American labor law in Japan, there are no description about Weingarten. So
and that's and this is so you're caught in a particular part of the universe where we really make this argument that there are so many embedded rights that workers have that are not being enforced because of this obsession with collective bargaining, that we both weaken the strength of unions, we weaken contracts, because in almost every collective bargaining situation, the employer is almost always going to have a stronger hand than the union. So our argument, classically stated, and I'll make sure that you have this majority unionism paper that I wrote. Originally, I wrote it for SEIU as part of a planning process. It was an argument about how we should grow. Well, they decided to grow another way, and but this is still our argument. We need to essentially build a broader-based workers' organization. I mean, workers' centers are too small, frankly. Membership is teeny. And they, I did the largest workers' center organization in the country is Casa de Maryland. When I first left Acorn, I worked off and on with them for a year to build a membership program. They now have about 10,000 members, but it's
excuse the name of the organization.
Casa de Maryland. It's in Spanish. Casa de Maryland. Yeah, it means house in Spanish, although that's actually an abbreviation for them, just like Acorn was an abbreviation. An acronym. Thank you. There's also yes.
So how do ACB local 100 help each other?
We are partners like this. They work out of our office. We share offices. You'll be in their office in St. Claude. And you'll see Danae, Rosa, and I in our offices. When you're meeting with them at one table, we'll be over there. So we're tricking you by giving you another space to meet in here where we could not interrupt all their business in the morning while we get together. So they were originally New Orleans Acorn. And so once Acorn had its problems, Acorn, after I left, formally went out of business November 5th of 2010, so almost 2 years ago. And then there were 38 different state organizations. Of those, maybe 8 of them have reconstituted and survived. One of them is a community voice.
And a lot of times too, to make it a little clearer also, is that a lot of times with the community boards, or I think we run into some of the same type, some of the same people by us representing a lot of the low-income workers in our union, and community boards is working to organize in low-income neighborhoods, so we sometimes run into the same people. So, you know.
Membership overlaps, so a member of Local 100 will be a member of a community voice, so they're, you know, our member could be in the office making phone calls for ACB to turn people out to a meeting, and that'll be one of our union members, so, or they'll, you know, ask us if we can call our membership to come to a meeting about whatever community issue is happening, or do we have any members in New Orleans East who might want to come to a New Orleans East meeting, or, you know, they're doing a campaign right now, which I'm sure y'all will hear about later, but about hiring local, it's a campaign, because we have, post-Katrina, we've had so much state and federal dollars come in to rebuild New Orleans. They're doing a campaign that says, instead of hiring all these Texans and, you know, wherever else, contractors to come in and rebuild schools and rebuild buildings, it should be local companies hiring local people. And we specifically want our local people in our neighborhoods to be hired, because we have high unemployment rates in our most, you know, even right near the office, high unemployment rates in a huge sector of our male population. So how do we get those people hired? We need to do a campaign to get them hired. So they've had several meetings where they've been building a list of people, and we have workers who are sometimes temporary seasonal workers that we have asked to call ACB and get on the list and fill out the paperwork, so that whenever we do win the campaign, they'll be on that list. So jobs is an issue, it's a community issue, and for our workers who are making, you know, sometimes $7.75, which is only 50 cents above minimum wage, we would like to see them, you know, if they want to get a higher paying job and get trained for it, well, we're, you know, that's something we want for people looking for a different kind of job. So, so that's an example.
Okay, how do you decide how to, I mean, what to do? Oh, this time the local 100 do this, and this time ACB do this, such a debate, that depends.
Well, they're separate organizations.
I know.
So they have their own membership and leadership process to make a decision. And then where you align, you jointly make a decision that, well, this is in both of our interests. This is such a good point, because when you talk about some of these organizations, working partnerships and number of lists, is whether or not these are legitimately community labor partnerships or just what I would call transactional. And many of these supposed community labor coalitions now are transactional, meaning a union has a campaign, it wants community support, it approaches a community group, it may exchange some money to help them do it, and so they're there to do a rally to help that union, but there's no real partnership. There's no mutuality of interest. The union is not building a community organization at all. Community organization is just providing support for the union. So our argument is you want these, we believe community labor partnerships can be transformative, not just transactional. And unfortunately, we don't have enough of that, but that, we still believe that's the, and our argument is that this is not just a United States phenomenal. We're doing a pilot around this program in Toronto right now with unions and Acorn Canada. But we believe this is also a model we should look at around the world to build. I mean, the labor movement is in disarray throughout certainly the industrialized world, throughout the whole world tonight. I mean, membership is falling everywhere. So we need a totally different model. Let me just make one suggestion for half a minute. We've been